Intervals of real numbers. A set I of real numbers is called an interval if any real number that lies between two numbers in I is also in I. Symbolically, we can write like this. This is read for all x, y in I and all z in R. If x is less than z and z is less than y, then z is in I. Let's just point out each part of this so you understand how these symbols are working. This first part, the upside down A, is read for all. So that's read for all x, y. And that Greek letter epsilon is the membership relation. That's read is a member of, or is an element of, or simply is in. So that whole first little part there is for all x, y in I. Then the second part, similarly, is for all z in R. After the parentheses, we have x is less than z and z is less than y. And once again, using that membership relation there, the last part of that says z is in I. The arrow there is the conditional or implication, and it could be read either implies or if then. Let's look at some examples. Let's let A be the set consisting of just 0 and 1. This is not an interval. In fact, there are infinitely many real numbers between 0 and 1, and none of those are in that set. As a specific example, 1/2 is a real number between 0 and 1, right? So we have 0 less than 1/2 and 1/2 less than 1, but 1/2 is not in the set A. So comparing this to the definition, if we let x equal 0 and y equal 1, and z 1/2, which is between 0 and 1, then we see that even though x and y are in the set A, and z is a real number between x and y, z is not in the set A. That violates the definition of being an interval. As a second example, let's look at R, the set of real numbers. Notice the special font. We're using a double struct font here to indicate that this is the special set R, the set of real numbers. This is an interval. When we think of the set of real numbers as an interval, we usually write it in interval notation like this with open parentheses, minus infinity, comma infinity. And to see that R is an interval, just plug it into the definition. So we have for all x, y in R, and for all z in R, if z is between x and y, then z is in R. Because you have z and r on the left and z and r at the end, it's really a triviality that R is an interval, even though the symbolic definition here looks complicated. The idea is very simple. If you take a real number between two things, well, that thing, you just said it's a real number. So obviously it satisfies the definition of interval. When we think of the real numbers as an interval, we can use this graphical representation called the real line. Notice how the real line goes infinitely to the left and infinitely to the right. In addition to the real line, there are 8 other types of intervals. We have open intervals. Okay, the open interval from A to B. We use open parentheses to indicate that it's an open interval. And this is the set of x and r, or the set of real numbers x, such that x is between A and B, not including A or B. Then we have closed intervals. For closed intervals, we use closed brackets. So we have the closed interval from A to B is the set of x and r, such that x is between A and B, including both A and B. We also have two kinds of half-open intervals. The first one is open on the left and closed on the right. So we have the half-open interval from A to B is the set of real numbers x, such that x is between A and B, not including A and including B. The other half-open interval is closed on the left and open on the right. And this is the set of real numbers x, such that x is between A and B, including A this time, but not including B. These four types of intervals are called bounded intervals. For example, the open interval AB, A is the infimum or greatest lower bound of the open interval AB, and B is the supremum or least upper bound of the open interval AB. And a similar thing could be said for all the other types of intervals. In all four of these cases, A is the infimum and B is the supremum. Then we have our unbounded intervals. The first type is the infinite open interval, A infinity. We use open parentheses to indicate infinite open intervals. This one is the set of x and r such that x is greater than A. And then we have negative infinity B, which is the x and r such that x is strictly less than B. And we have two kinds of infinite closed intervals. We use a closed bracket on the part where the real number is. So this is the closed infinite interval from A to infinity is the set of x and r such that x is greater than or equal to A. And we have the closed infinite interval from negative infinity to B is the set of x and r such that x is less than or equal to B. Let's look at a couple of examples, specific examples. So as an example of a half-open interval, we have the half-open interval from -2 to 1, which is the set of x and r such that x is between -2 and 1, not including -2 and including 1. We could look at this graphically on the real line by using an open parenthesis at -2 and a closed bracket at 1 and shading in between those two real numbers. As another example, we have the infinite open interval 0 infinity, which is the set of x and r such that x is greater than 0, strictly greater than 0. And here's what a graph of this looks like on the real line. We use an open parenthesis at 0, and we shade infinitely toward the right. So these are 8 different types of intervals. Together with the real line itself, we get 9 different kinds of intervals. It's pretty easy to see that each of these sets are intervals. You just have to check that they satisfy the definition of being an interval. I'll leave that for you to check on your own. The harder direction, which is not so easy, is that given any interval, it has to have one of these 9 forms. As a partial proof of this, I'm going to go over it just for the bounded intervals. So we have theorem 6.1 here, which says if an interval I is bounded, then there are A, B, and R such that one of the following holds. I is either equal to the open interval AB, the closed interval AB, or one of the two half-open intervals from A to B. So before we write out a partial proof, let's just analyze the situation. We're going to prove this by letting A be the infimum of the interval I and B the supremum of the interval I. In other words, A is the greatest lower bound of I and B is the least upper bound of I. We know that these things exist by the completeness property of the reals. And then we're going to do each of the following. First, we'll show that the interval I is a subset of the closed interval AB. Then we'll show that the open interval AB is a subset of I. And finally, we'll look at 4 different cases. As one sample case, if A and B are in I, then it's going to turn out that not only is I a subset of the closed interval AB, but also that the closed interval AB is a subset of I. Right? From 2, we'll already have the open interval AB is a subset of I. And then since we're assuming that A and B are in I, it's pretty obvious that we get the whole closed interval a subset of I. Okay, and then there will be 3 other cases that you should really check after this. We're just going to do this one case in detail. Okay, so once we have that each of these 2 sets are subsets of each other, it follows from the axiom of extensionality that the 2 sets are actually equal to each other. Remember that the axiom of extensionality says that x equals y if and only if x is a subset of y and y is a subset of x. In other words, 2 sets are equal if and only if they're subsets of each other. All right, we're ready to go through the proof. So we're going to start with I being a bounded interval. Let I be a bounded interval. Since I is bounded, by the completeness of R, I has a least upper bound B. As a consequence of the completeness of R, I has a greatest lower bound A. If you haven't proved this already, then this is something you might want to try to prove on your own, right? So the existence of a greatest lower bound doesn't follow from the definition of completeness, but it is still a consequence of completeness that needs to be proved. Okay, if X is an element of the interval I, then by the definitions of upper bound and lower bound, we have that X is in the closed interval AB. Since X was an arbitrary element of I, for all X in I implies X is in the closed interval AB. In other words, I is a subset of the closed interval AB. Okay, so we've accomplished the first of our 3 goals. Next, we want to show that the open interval AB is a subset of I. So we'll start by letting Z be an element of the open interval AB. That means that Z is between A and B, strictly. Since B is the least upper bound of I, that means that Z is not an upper bound of I, right? Because Z is smaller than B, so it can't be. So that means there's a Y in I with Z less than Y. Similarly, since A is the greatest lower bound of I, Z is not a lower bound of I. So there's an X in I with X less than Z. Now we use the definition of interval. Since I is an interval, X and Y are in I, and Z is between X and Y, it follows, because I is an interval, that Z has to be in I. Since Z was an arbitrary element of the open interval AB, we have shown that for all X, X in the open interval AB implies that X is in the interval I. So, open interval AB is a subset of I. That completes our second task. Okay, so we have shown that both the open interval AB is a subset of I, and I is a subset of the closed interval AB. Okay, as we said before, there are 4 cases to consider. I'll do one case in detail. If both the greatest lower bound of I, namely A, and the least upper bound of I, namely B, are elements of I, then not only is the open interval AB a subset of I, but in this case, A and B are also in I, so the closed interval AB is a subset of I. And we have already shown that I is a subset of the closed interval AB. So I is equal to the closed interval AB. The other 3 cases are handled similarly.